Tonight on PBS News Weekend, smoke from raging Canadian wildfires drifts into the United States, triggering air quality warnings across the upper Midwest. Then how lawmakers across the country are trying to rein in citizen-led ballot initiatives. And we follow a group of rehabilitated seals making their way back into the sea off the coast of Rhode Island.
It's so important to protect this species because prior to the 1970s, the populations were almost completely decimated.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Poor air quality warnings have been posted in the upper Midwest, advising people with heart or lung disease, older adults, and pregnant people to limit outdoor activities. The reason is wildfires burning in Western Canada, some of them hundreds of miles away. Meteorologists say that this weekend, the smoke and the fine particulate matter it carries could reach Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Chris Foltz is a National Weather Service Central Region Fire Weather Program Manager.
The smoke is being lofted into the air, and with the weather pattern that's in place right now, we've got an area of low pressure basically just east of Hudson Bay over the Great Lakes, which is bringing that air south. We also have a ridge of high pressure over the western U.S., which is kind of helping to funnel that smoke from Canada down through the northern plains and into the middle Mississippi Valley.
Earlier, I spoke with Matthew Capucci, meteorologist at MyRadar. I asked him about the health risks from the smoke.
Well, there are two things I think folks are most likely noticing. Number one, anytime you have this fine particulate matter, we call it PM 2.5, down at ground level, that's dangerous for elderly, vulnerable populations. That's a big concern over parts of the upper Midwest, obviously Canada, where the wildfires are originating, but across North Dakota, across much of Minnesota, the entire state of Minnesota, under an air quality alert right now, which will likely be pushed into early next week. Parts of Michigan, north of Chicago, and in Wisconsin. A lot of folks of the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. Now, when the smoke is up high, causing changes to the light, it's harmless, but down near the surface, when we're breathing it in, it's really bad. It's like if you were sitting next to a campfire and breathing that in, you wouldn't want to do that. If I were in North Dakota right now, I'd be turning off my air conditioning and only circulating the air inside my home.
So the danger and the threat is the same hundreds of miles away as if you were sitting next to that fire.
Yeah, most definitely. Unless we're really ventilating the atmosphere, taking what's down low and sort of diffusing it higher aloft, then we still have those high concentrations at the surface. We're seeing over 200 on the air quality scale. Anything over 50 is bad, but over 200 in parts of North Dakota right now. And my fear is that as these fires continue to burn, we're just adding more smoke to the atmosphere, and it can surf these jet stream winds, winds in the upper atmosphere, down over North America. Back in 2023, we saw the smoke reach all the way down to New York City, turning the skies orange as far south as like the Tennessee Valley. I don't think, at least initially, it will get that bad farther south, but still, over the northern tier, we could see some very high-end impacts with this.
And talk a little bit about the air quality index. What does it take to trigger an advisory?
It all has to do with the concentrations of how much of that particulate matter is in the atmosphere. The denser the concentrations, the higher the number goes. Anytime I'm seeing numbers around 200, that's the point where you can smell and you can taste the smoke in the air. Your eyes might start to sting, your throat might hurt a little bit, and especially for those vulnerable populations, it's a really significant hazard.
You talked about turning off the air conditioning, that ventilation could bring it into your house?
Yeah, anything folks can do to eliminate essentially outside air coming in is what I would really recommend. We hate to say it, but those N95 masks from the COVID era could come in handy because once again, the smoke is made up of these fine little particulates that you don't want to be breathing in. If you have to go outside in the affected areas, that's a really good thing to sort of put one protective layer between you and the air you're breathing in.
And once again, just to remind people, when there's an air quality advisory, are there particular people who need to be especially careful?
Anybody with pre-existing conditions, the elderly, those with respiratory conditions, underlying conditions, children, especially vulnerable to, infants, babies, and then sort of after everyone else, middle-aged folks too. But really, when the air quality gets as bad as it is over parts of the northern plains and the upper Midwest right now, that's dangerous for anybody.
What are Canadian officials saying about how significant these fires are?
They're sort of sounding the alarm. They're sort of peaking their scales. Right now, for example, Alberta and Ontario are under an extreme risk of wildfires. That's verbiage rarely used by Environment Canada. That's the equivalent up there of the National Weather Service in the US. And to sort of max out the scale says this is a higher end event. Likewise, the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center has drawn up a level 5 out of 5. They're basically saying all systems go in terms of combating and fighting these fires. They're allocating all the resources they have to. When they sort of max out these scales, that's a sign of a really significant event underway. And we're still so early in the summer. We're just getting into June now. This is something we more typically see later into June into early July. So I do fear this could be another bad fire season for our neighbors to the north. And one thing we're noting, with climate change, we're seeing sort of a tendency for these heat domes, these blocking ridges of high pressure to last a little longer, be a little stronger, be a little bigger and more stubborn. And that's sort of tilting the scales to higher end fire events.
Matthew Capucci of My Radar, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In tonight's other news, global reaction to a surprise tariff announcement from President Trump. During a rally at a Pennsylvania steel mill Friday night, the president said he was doubling levies on imported steel.
We are going to be imposing a 25% increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America, which will even further secure the steel industry in the United States. Nobody's going to get around that.
Later, Mr. Trump posted on social media that beginning Wednesday, he'll also impose tariffs on aluminum. The European Union said it strongly regrets the move and is prepared to impose countermeasures. Canada said tariffs will harm North American security. In Ukraine, Russia launched drone and missile attacks ahead of a fresh round of peace talks. The overnight strikes killed at least 2 people, including a 9-year-old girl in the frontline Zaporizhia region. The deadly attacks came ahead of peace talks set for Monday in Istanbul. It's not clear yet whether a Ukrainian delegation will be there. Meanwhile, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators met with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv on Friday. Republican Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and Democrat Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut discussed U.S. sanctions on Russia, which Graham said he expects Congress to act on next week. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth pressed Indo-Pacific allies to increase defense spending as tensions with China rise. At an Asia Security Summit in Singapore, Hegseth said China poses a cyber threat to critical infrastructure in the United States and around the world. And he warned China not to try to take Taiwan militarily.
Any attempt by Communist China to conquer Taiwan by force would result in devastating consequences for the Indo-Pacific and the world. There's no reason to sugarcoat it. The threat China poses is real, and it could be imminent. We hope not, but it certainly could be.
China's defense minister didn't attend the conference, citing the ongoing U.S.-Chinese trade war. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, how lawmakers are making it harder for citizens to get proposed new laws on state ballots. And after nearly 2 months of rehabilitation, a group of SEALs heads home.
This is PBS News Weekend from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
Right now, voters in 24 states and the District of Columbia can bypass their legislatures by gathering signatures to get proposed laws or constitutional amendments on the ballot. But according to the Associated Press, about 40 bills in roughly a dozen states are being considered or have already been signed into law to restrict this citizen initiative process. Dane Waters is head of the University of Southern California's Nonpartisan Initiative and Referendum Institute. Mr. Waters, in your view, what's the role of this citizen ballot initiative in our American democracy?
Well, it's a check and balance on representative government. It's not a replacement for it. And this is what a lot of people don't understand, is that they think that when we have direct democracy, or in the states where it does exist, that somehow it's trying to circumvent or bypass normal representative government. But it's not. It's always been designed to be a check and balance and a safety valve for the people to use when the legislature, for whatever reason, is unwilling or unable to do things that the people want.
And why are legislatures, why are lawmakers, elected lawmakers, trying to restrict it?
Well, there's always been this animosity by lawmakers against direct democracy in the United States ever since the process has been around. They see it as an affront to their power. But what they seem to forget is that when they are elected, the people aren't giving away their sovereign rights. They're just loaning those rights to the lawmakers. And they reserve the right to make laws with the initiative process or direct democracy. And so this confrontation between lawmakers and the people has always been there. And this is why we see the affront and the assaults on the process that we're seeing.
And what sorts of restrictions are we talking about that are being proposed or actually enacted in some laws?
Well, everything from shortening the circulation period, the amount of time you have to collect signatures, putting in place distribution requirements, saying that you have to get from every congressional district or state legislative district, limiting who can collect signatures, saying that they can only be registered voters or they must be living inside the state, limiting the amount of money that can be in the process. You name, the size of the font, pretty much any restriction that you can think of. The state legislatures have been pretty creative, but the courts throughout time have struck down many of these restrictions as unconstitutional, which is why lawmakers are getting even more creative in the restrictions that they're placing on the process.
Now, some lawmakers who are proposing these restrictions say they're trying to prevent a special interest from hijacking the process. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, every human being on this planet is a special interest. Everyone has their own interest, and special interests, just like any interest, have the right to propose anything. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter who is behind a ballot measure. Only the citizens of a specific state can vote for it. But it's just like the state legislature. You have special interests, whether it's insurance companies, gambling organizations, or people who are pro-LGBT rights or anti-LGBT rights. They're always lobbying the state legislature. So it makes sense that the same interest would try to influence whether a ballot measure passes or not.
We spoke to Kelly Hall, the executive director of the Fairness Project, which is a progressive group that's backed dozens of ballot initiatives across the country. Let's hear what she had to say.
Instead of having a fair fight, a really public conversation about the issues where politicians or other citizens who disagree on an issue say, let's persuade each other, let's have a debate. Instead, they're making changes to font size of petitions and how many you can carry and who's allowed to carry them. And that's the way democracy dies.
What's your reaction?
Well, I think she's 100% right. I mean, when state legislatures are trying to silence the people's ability to use direct democracy or be a check and balance on them, democracy will suffer. So she's spot on in what she's saying.
You've advised ballot campaigns in about 20 countries around the world. How do attitudes about this compare with attitudes in the United States?
Well, globally, the expansion of direct democracy is there. I mean, most lawmakers around the world seem to not have this animosity toward the citizens, and they're actually trying to expand the process. Even Ukraine, just before the war, they had just put in place a national initiative process there to deal with issues, and then the war took place, and so they haven't had the chance to use it. In the United States, there's this, as we've talked about, this constant animosity between lawmakers and the people, where the lawmakers try to shut the people out of the process. So around the world, lawmakers try to include the people. In the United States, lawmakers seem to try to exclude the people.
Dane Waters, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
After decades of political and social progress, women's rights are now the subject of renewed political debate and policy change amid a seemingly broader backlash against the goals of modern feminism. Ali Rogan spoke with Atlantic staff writer and Pulitzer Prize finalist Sophie Gilbert about her new book, Girl on Girl, which argues that pop culture of the 90s and early 2000s may have set back a generation of women.
So, Sophie, obviously, these days, women's rights are a huge part of the political conversation in the United States. So with everything that's going on right now, why look back at this period in the recent history of pop culture?
I think because to me, it felt like it might all be connected, particularly after Roe v. Wade was overturned. I just felt like I couldn't understand what had happened, certainly to feminism, but also to women in culture during my lifetime. And there were people who were pulsing the politics of that moment, but it felt like it might make sense to me as a critic to go back and look at the culture of the moment that shaped my generation and also the generation that came after.
And the term feminism, of course, through the decades has meant different things to different people. But I'd like you to tell us about how the word and the idea of feminism evolved during this particular period.
I've always understood feminism personally just to mean, do you believe that women are equal human beings? And do you believe that they should have equal rights in society under the law? And that seems kind of simple to me. But I've understood through my research, it's not always been so simple. One of the questions I wanted to understand in my book was how, I think music is a useful example, how in the music of the 1990s, we went from this really kind of ferocious activist moment of the early 90s, so many women in rock and roll making really impassioned music about womanhood, about subjects like sexual assault, really political music in lots of ways. How we went from that energy to the pop stars of the 2000s who were sort of very highly sexualized, didn't really speak up for themselves, weren't allowed to in many ways, and who then again were really targeted by media across the course of the 2000s. Sort of wanting to understand how that shift happened, it also came to tell me a little bit about what happened in feminism during the 90s as well. And this shift from third wave feminism at the beginning of the 90s and things like the Year of the Woman and Anita Hill's Senate testimony towards post-feminism, which was less an ideology, I would say, than a kind of trend in media that told women that they'd achieved everything they ever needed to, that there was no longer any point in protesting or in activism. They should just go out and celebrate all the freedoms that they'd achieved. And often that meant spending money, which is why I think it was appealing to lots of people. But that shift from third wave feminism to post-feminism seemed to really play out in the culture of the 90s in ways that profoundly impacted what happened after.
There seems to be a certain pattern throughout the book that you identify where you start in the earlier part of this era with these very powerful expressions of female self-actualization. You have the Riot Girl movement, who came up with girl power, which then got kind of appropriated by the commercial forces behind the Spice Girls. And then in the fashion world, you had these Amazonian supermodels who exuded presence, who later got replaced by these very waifish young models. Is that a pattern?
It was 100% a pattern, I think, throughout the culture of the 90s, the shift away from women, and certainly strong, powerful women who were really a presence in media at the beginning of the decade, towards girls. I think you can see it in music, as you said, but in fashion as well, you had this shift away from the supermodels, the Cindy Crawfords and the Naomi Campbells, who worked very much as a unit and they fought for each other and they were paid very well. And I think because of that, the designers got frustrated and they felt that the models were overshadowing the clothes. And so you can see this very intentional shift in fashion towards the more waifish models that came later in the 90s, the Kate Mosses, the rise of heroin chic, and this shift towards younger women who sort of didn't have the same energy and couldn't quite stand up for themselves in the same way.
Reading this book, you kind of want to come to the end of it and think, oh, thank God that's over. But it doesn't really feel like it's over, does it?
Yeah, there is so much that unfortunately reminds me of the 2000s now. And obviously, there's a real element of outrageous and cruel and dehumanizing misogyny in a lot of the internet now. And that part, I think, is very gloomy to think about. But at the same time, when I look at the culture that's being made now, when I look at the movies and the television and the books being written and the art and the voices throughout media, there is so much more about women than there was back then. There are so many more women making art, certainly, full stop. And so, yes, these these elements of misogyny still present, but they're not being reiterated by the culture at large. And so that's the thing that I think I cling to.
The book is Girl on Girl. Sophie Gilbert, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Finally tonight, we go to New England, where a group of seals is making a splash. On a beach in Westerly, Rhode Island, onlookers watch as a gray seal emerges from a crate and heads toward the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, flopping along on its belly in an undulating motion known as galumphing.
It's so important to protect this species because prior to the 1970s, the populations were almost completely decimated.
Sarah Callan manages the animal rescue program at Connecticut's Mystic Aquarium. The released seal was one of 6 her team rescued during March and April from the waters near Block Island, Rhode Island. They had become ensnared in fishing gear and other debris. Callan says sea litter, much of it plastic, is a growing threat to seals and other mammals around the globe. Each year, nearly 100,000 marine mammals are killed or injured after becoming ensnared in discarded plastic.
We've had animals get entangled in frisbees that end up around their neck. So all sorts of everyday things. Animals can ingest the plastic as well, which poses many threats to them.
Callan's team spent weeks nursing the rescued seals back to health, treating their severe infected wounds with antibiotics. Before releasing them, researchers made sure they'd be able to track them.
The seals that we released had a variety of tags on them, and those tags are going to give us really great real-time data about the animal's location, how deep they're diving, and then how long they spend at each depth.
Gray seals can dive up to 1,000 feet for food and can hold their breath underwater for up to 90 minutes. And Callan says they play a big role in the health of their ecosystems.
Seals help nourish the ocean, they spread nutrients around, and they're just such a vital part of the environment.
In addition to marine pollution, habitat loss and climate change threaten their future. And Sarah Callan says her group and others like it will be around as long as seals and other marine animals need help. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Sunday. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by...
In 1995, 2 friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.